Probably the most important question that you all have is why are we here? The short answer is we're here because somebody told you that this is a required course to graduate from college and it's your goal to graduate from college. But on another level, the question is why have people decided that this should be a required course for somebody who wants to graduate from college in the state of Georgia? It's not actually a law everywhere that you need to take an American government course. But the people in the General Assembly for Georgia have decided that this is an important aspect of giving people a well-rounded education. And I think here that I will take advantage of the opportunity to give you some answers as to why that might be. Naturally, there's some trade-offs. I've learned 53 things in 53 years. If you ask someday, I'll give you the full list. But some of the things that I've picked up over time is that life is a series of trade-offs. It's not like you're going to have back the weeks that you take this course. No one is promised even another day. You know, you might think, well, if I knew I only had one more day, I probably wouldn't be listening to Carl right now. But on the other hand, most of us spend our time planning against the future, right? You know, people always say, well, does it make sense that I'm here? Well, you know, I don't know. Does it make sense that you're here? It makes sense if you've decided to dedicate the time that you have available to you to getting a degree, to helping you to achieve what you're trying to achieve in life. And life is short. If you live to be 80 years old, you have 4,160 weeks. And you're saying 8 of those weeks I'm going to spend with Dr. Snook and we're going to learn a little bit about American government. And at the end of those 8 weeks, at the end of these 4 or 5 years of college, you know, hopefully you have a degree that gets you where you're dreaming and hoping to be. And it's not my goal to get in the way of that for anyone. It's my goal to facilitate that for you. And I certainly want to take whatever amount of time is necessary. But ultimately, if you're going to be dedicating your time this semester to taking this course, then what you need to do is you need to pass and you need to do well because there is no reason to be here if you're going to not pass. That has to be our top goal. You ever want to look to see who to blame? Blame the Georgia General Assembly. It's actually a law in the state of Georgia. The Georgia Code 3217 says that no one should be allowed to graduate or receive a certificate of graduation or a degree without successfully completing coursework in the history of the United States, the history of Georgia, and on the provisions and principles of the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution of the state of Georgia. Why do you think that they did this? Why do you think that the General Assembly did this? Certainly it couldn't be the goal of the Georgia General Assembly just to give you one more thing to trip you up. Well, maybe here are some other things. Maybe here are some other reasons. You have to be here, right? The Georgia General Assembly said you have to be here, but hopefully you can learn some things, such as tools for critical thinking. We're going to have some elements of history. We're going to have some elements of reasoning, of rational choice theory. In fact, the mixing of history and the processing of it in light of the problems of today are key elements. A political science, the field of political science is developed largely from mixing other social sciences, philosophy, psychology, economics, and history into an effort to understand how people make decisions and why people make decisions. And as such, This becomes a great overview of the various social science disciplines um, in one small effort to understand the country in which we're living. Uh, if you understand the American political system and how it works and how it affects you, it makes you a more productive and effective person in interacting with the American society. So we're going to learn about government structure. We're going to learn about elections and parties. We're going to even learn a bit about American political values. These are all things that as we try to wade our way through the lives that we lead, knowing that government affects every aspect of our life, uh, become very useful. And frankly, one of the main reasons the Georgia General Assembly did this is because they're giving you a finishing course in political socialization. Ever since you were a small child, you've been introduced to ideas of political socialization. The first time I was handed an American flag was at a Memorial Day parade in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. I was probably 3 years old, 4 years old, something like that. Um, I don't know, maybe I was five. And when I was given this flag and I started to wave it, uh, it was part of this process where I learned what, at least in my family, it meant to be an American. And all of you have all had your own political socialization, and in many cases, it might be very different from mine. Uh, but you're learning of your place, where you are, and where you interact with the political community in which you live. Um, has been taught to you by family, by friends, by your interaction with the world. This semester, we're going to deal a good bit with American politics today, and not just an historical framework, but we're going to learn who some of the people are who are significant in American government. And we're also going to spend a good amount of time talking about how things like elections and government institutions affect uh, our lives. Now, one of the main aspects of the American politics today are the mixed results of the 2022 election. We had the Republicans gain a narrow majority in the House of Representatives, and we're going to see, though, how that narrow majority often results in a great deal of power for the majority party, so long as they work to stick together. The Democrats actually gained control of the U.S. Senate. The election was somewhat stacked in their favor. We'll see uh, this semester that because of how elections occur in the U.S. Senate, that sometimes one party can do exceptionally well in the Senate elections while not doing well in the House elections. And this depends an awful lot on who's up for election. We'll talk a bit about the President of the United States and factors that uh, interact with his increase or decrease in power. We'll talk about the Supreme Court. In some ways, when there's a divided government between the House and the presidency, or between the executive and legislative branches, it gives more power to the Supreme Court. A lot of people have complained recently about the Supreme Court, but in fact, um, the Supreme Court is a very powerful and important institution in American government. But maybe the institution that we should be paying the most attention to is the bureaucracy, which is to say the permanent employees who are always working for the U.S. government and do not change between elections. So all of these aspects will be covered this semester, and we'll try to focus on why it's important in our lives. Going into the 2022 elections, a lot of people had questions about what was going to happen in Georgia politics. There was the huge rematch between Governor Kemp and Stacey Abrams, and there was also a U.S. Senate election between Herschel Walker and Senator Raphael Warnock. And as such, people wondered if this was going to lead to a change in Georgia politics. The Democrats had done particularly well in recent elections, narrowing the General Assembly lead that the Republicans had. You have to remember that following the 2010 elections, the Republicans had nearly a 2-to-1 majority in the General Assembly, a majority that has shrunk dramatically in the years since then, though they still control both the State House and the State Senate. All of the members of the Georgia Supreme Court, except one, have been appointed by Republican governors. So you see that the Georgia Supreme Court has a tendency that leans toward the Republicans. But the governor race and the Senate race were the two big things that everyone discussed. And just as with the national election, we had a split result. Senator Warnock was reelected, and so was Governor Kemp, by a surprisingly large margin, really. The Republicans hadn't been doing well in statewide elections in recent years, and especially on the national level. But Governor Kemp was able to win by a healthy margin, and along with Governor Kemp, all of the other elected officials except the U.S. Senate race. This probably leads us to the question of what happens next. And the 2024 election is coming up, and people will wonder whether the Democrats will do well in the 2020 election, in the 2024 election, like they did in the 2020 election in Georgia. We'll look at patterns. We'll see where political science makes predictions. We'll look at elements like President Biden's job approval, and we'll try to show how that is often very descriptive of how candidates do who support the president. But all of these will be elements that we will have our own opinions on, but it's perhaps more important in a class like this for us to look at what political science tells us, so that we can have that added bit of knowledge and understanding of how our world works. And so here we go. The next several weeks we'll try very hard to make worth our while and maybe give us some insight that will help us in the future.